Welcome to the Common Good Podcast, where change agents, social innovators, faith leaders, business leaders, community activists come together at the intersection of remembering and belonging in a sense of place. I'm your host, Troy Bronsink from The Hive in Cincinnati. The framework for our conversation is the relationship of three scholars whose lives' work have shaped and informed one another. Walter Brueggemann, Peter Block, and John McKnight are notable thought leaders in their own rights, but at this point in their careers, their work has begun to shape the others. In fact, their friendship becomes a sort of model for how the common good shows up in local, tangible, relational ways.
So the performance of neighborliness would be partly the distribution of ownership and the willingness to invest in people on the margin.
That's right.
People that we used to call poor, now we call them neighbors.
Each episode in this first season will be conversations between these three scholars. In some ways, these are old friends that are together. You can picture them around the kitchen table. In other ways, they're kind of weighing in on the life experience of their work and how it's shown up in the world. We'll be dropping into this conversation. You'll hear them refer to other points of the conversation throughout today's podcast. Today's episode begins with a question that Peter asks about the impact of their work. In other words, how would folks act on their life's work? And in there, you'll hear quickly Peter talk about his own work around 6 conversations, and John McKnight talk about his own work around asset-based community development. And then Walter really kicks off with this kind of deeper question of what is it to put this stuff into practice?
What I do is teach people the 6 conversations and say goodbye.
And John's jumping in now.
I teach them the 5 assets and go on myself.
And then say goodbye, go down to Walter. I don't know, how would you say what you tell them before you say goodbye, Walter?
And now Walter chips in.
I teach them an alternative narrative
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
that is waiting to be performed.
So maybe that's the question, is what's waiting to be performed?
Yeah.
You know, last time you began by talking about the unmasking, that what you do with the church is help unmask. Every institution, every empire
That's right.
has to speak in euphemisms, and whoever captures it first captures the flag. You know, this is patriotism because it's my certainty.
That's right. That's right.
And I thought that was so unmasking. But what else would you say about, if somebody said, what's to be performed in the world as well as in the church?
Well, what's to be performed is neighborhood. And John knows much more about this than I, but I would say that the 3 acts of neighborhood are generosity, hospitality, and forgiveness. Each of which contradicts the totalism. Totalism is based on scarcity, exclusion, and revenge.
What leads to vengeance or revenge?
Oh, the sense that you've been transgressed and you have to get even.
And that's the opposite of hospitality.
Forgiveness.
Forgiveness. This is the thou shalt not covet.
That's right. I think the 10 Commandments can be interpreted that way.
As a performance or a mandate.
Yeah. Or guideline. Yeah.
You know, if I trail back the economic system that we call the empire, and what is it underneath it all? What is it? And it began with enclosure and said that there are no more common lands.
Yep.
There's
That's
no more
right.
common good.
That's right.
It's mine. And
Yeah.
I can make more money with sheep on that land.
Yeah. But behind the enclosure is the ideology of scarcity.
Yes.
I've got to fence it because I don't have enough, and if the neighbors come in on my grass, I don't have enough grass for my sheep.
And it's established the primacy of property.
That's right.
And solve the dilemma of the commons, which is, how do we be fair if everybody could use the same space?
That's right.
We don't have, we have to depend on culture rather than law.
That's right. So that,
And we gave up on culture and established law. It's the way of deciding about the
that's
commons.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Yep, yep. Because culture makes possible a sense of restraint for the sake of the neighborhood.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you take that away, then you eat up all the commons.
I mean, it's here where the conversation around practices of neighborliness lean toward this question of how do we define our relationship with the land and with one another? This question of what is it that we have dominion over and what is it like to have a posture of receiving?
There's a very famous article written by a guy named Lynn White arguing that the Bible is responsible for the rape of the earth because in Genesis 1, God says you will have dominion.
Over, yeah.
That's a misread. And that's been answered to say it was really John Locke and Francis Bacon who invented privatization
Right, private,
in
it's
the
mine.
17th century.
If it was a misread, dominion, what is the correct read?
Well, it means to preside over that it may flourish.
It may flourish.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That would be a good lord,
Lord, yeah.
of the manor.
Mm-hmm.
A good manor, the lord of the manor doesn't exploit the property, but nourishes it for the next generation,
Yeah.
as in Downton Abbey.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. Great story. Walter, your three, let me, just to move the categories along, there's maybe a fourth or a domain. Generosity and hospitality and forgiveness are all things I do. I think there's another thing, which is the willingness to receive.
Yes,
And it's the unwillingness to receive that creates the whole service mentality, right? I mean, it is I got it, you don't, is the underlying premise. And that's a barrier against my receiving from you. And I think the common is that I'm receiving and giving,
right,
right?
right.
So the whole modern market is mostly I am getting,
Yeah,
right? Not that I am giving. It's the difference between the unilateral and the bilateral
Right.
understanding of relationships.
that's right.
And so I would just add
Yeah,
the ability to
that's good.
receive
Yep.
as something else that.
And would the antithesis of that be
Oh,
an unwillingness to receive because you don't want to be indebted, or where would the
no.
unwillingness to receive?
Well, in this, I think of unwillingness to receive is that I'm superior. That I know you don't know.
Right.
I fix, you're the fixee. Right. It's what Christian charity does. It makes me superior.
Yes, of course.
And so I think the unwillingness to receive is this sense that I am above you.
Right. Right.
And therefore, it's a great equalizer of our talents being shared. And
Right.
that's what we have the commons for in the first place.
Yeah.
Right, is the shared
Right.
purpose that it
Right.
provides. So I just add that one.
That's good. I like that.
That's an element of empire, is I know, colonialism, I know and you don't.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
That was Truman in 49, who said, these poor countries to the south, these undeveloped countries, we're
Yes.
going to help them out.
Right.
And they didn't know they were undeveloped
That's right.
until he
Yep.
shared that with them.
Yeah.
You did raise, well, there's another reason, I suppose, for it, which I saw in Japan. In Japan, there's an absolute cultural demand. It's as strong as any cultural demand we get out of our society, that if I give you something, you must give me something
Right.
of equal worth.
Right.
I am placing an on you. The on would be the word, an on, right?
Yeah.
Now, the result of that is that to give a gift is is something people don't want to have happen, because it places an on you.
Right.
It isn't. I can't sit back and say, "Oh, well, thank you. It was my
Yes.
birthday." I must return to you
Right.
in equal measure
Right.
what you have done
Yep.
for me, and I've got a ledger book in my head in which I relieve the on.
Right.
I get the on off my back.
Yeah.
And so there it is. I don't want to be indebted to you.
Yeah. And I would think that if one has an obligation to respond, that there would be pressure to top the first gift and give a better gift.
I don't know about
Yeah.
that. I've always heard it said by Japanese. It's
Equal.
yeah.
Equal. Yeah, maybe so.
Equal and
Yeah. Yeah.
Where does generosity occur then in a Japanese culture?
Yeah. That's interesting. I should. Where would generosity ever be something that would be positive, right?
Well, maybe it's through kindness, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe when it gets concretized in
Yeah.
a physical thing.
Right.
We want to maintain equity like the potlatch.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
Where
it.
we do
Yep.
that. But maybe relationally, there's kind to culture as anybody.
Yeah.
And I think the other word for the performance of reciprocity is to create social equity.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the big struggle with empire and the economy now, is it produces social inequity. And
Yep.
equity in the literal sense of what do I own? Social meaning the public
Yep.
sense.
Yep. Yep.
And there are, every time there's a development, there's a conversation with the public in Cincinnati. They have hearings, they have gatherings, they have meetings. And the outcome is never equitable. And so even as you develop a vulnerable neighborhood, they still call it development, even though outsiders have come in and build large new structures. But the residents never end up owning anything more than they did before the development occurred.
Right.
Well, they usually moved out.
Well, and sometimes they move out, and
Yeah.
sometimes
I mean,
it was empty to start with, but they get dispossessed. It's
Yeah.
our own diaspora
Yeah.
onto
Yeah.
Yep.
the west side.
Yeah.
But that to me is, you say, what would the performance look like? It would be to see that every transaction both ended up owning more than they started with.
Right. Right.
Doesn't have to be equal. I don't know, we were talking, somebody's talking about the distinction between equity and equality.
Is it
And equality, there's nothing just about equality. It's
zero
treating everybody
sum?
the same. You know, where equity means that I own. To me, the reparations, you say, what would the performance of this neighborhood look like?
Right.
It was attend to reparations.
Yes.
And reparations meant that we all had control of our financial well-being.
Right.
We all had some asset that would live on, whether it's land or enterprise or building.
Right.
And we don't argue about it all being equal,
Right.
because
Right.
that's the accidental nature of, you
Yeah.
know, gene parent selection maybe, or whatever.
Right. Right.
But I do think that's the hardest thing to talk about.
Yeah.
And John, when we've talked to so many people that have built Dudley Street,
Yeah.
and the neighborhood woman in Chicago, you know, what was the name of that?
Jackie Reed?
Jackie Reed, yeah. And you say, well, we've managed health care, so it's distributed, you know. And we've solved the housing thing, so now we have housing. But what about ownership of assets and equity? They say, oh, we haven't got there yet. What about the economy?
Yeah.
We haven't got there yet.
Yeah.
They're still dependent on this bigger cycle that you're talking about, which is I'm going to do well in the morning
Right.
and do good in the afternoon.
Yes,
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And that's the justification. I make a lot of money in the morning.
Yes.
And then I pile it up in the afternoon and give you 5% a year.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's what we call. And that's that's
Yeah.
the struggle is to unlock that money
Right.
and use it to invest in people, not
Yeah.
invest in professional services.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
And most of it goes,
Yeah, that was, incidentally, I had research done in the anti-poverty area as to who got the money. And I have, for Cook County, got one of the economics members of our faculty to do a study of who got the money that was for poor people.
Right.
All the federal money and all the state money where the classification of beneficiary was poor, right? And you can find that in the legislation. And then who got it? I should give this to you. You'd be,
I want it.
Quite, yeah, yeah.
I would love to see that.
Okay, and about 63% of it is not money going to poor people.
I'm surprised it's 37.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All the rest goes, well, a little goes for food and housing subsidy, and the great amount goes to professionals, right? And then the remaining gets, so this study shows at the time that was done, that if you took all of the money that came for poor people in the Cook County, and you said, here's the poverty line, right? And here's the amount of money that people are short of being above the poverty line. All people add that up. That there was more money came into Cook County for poor people than would, or put it the other way, the amount of money that came in, if you gave it to everybody so that they would be above the poverty line, there was more money left if you did that than the way it happened, which is you just ended up giving it to people who had money already.
Yeah.
And
We're
nothing.
afraid to give money to people that don't have money.
That's right.
Yes.
What is that about? I mean, is that
Oh,
covetous?
boy,
Is
when
that
I was in
empire?
that field, it's misuse.
We have
You know,
a story
buy
about them.
alcohol and drugs with. Oh,
That's right.
that's
Well,
so
Chuck,
powerful.
Chuck Grassley said that about the tax plan.
Yeah.
He said, we're gonna fix it so that these people
Can't-
can't manage it, because they use all their money on booze, women, and movies.
Yeah.
That's what he said.
Unlike the rich people.
That's right.
That's
Warren
As
Hatch,
we're learning every
Warren
day.
Hatch said he was so tired of taking care of people who won't do anything for themselves.
Yeah, yeah. I'll send
quite
it
a
to you.
projection, isn't it?
It's quite a projection. I couldn't believe those people would say things like that,
Yeah.
even if they think that they ought to shut their mouths.
That's the valve that's been opened.
That's right. That's exactly
Speak
right.
without consequence.
That's right.
So the performance of neighborliness would be partly the distribution of ownership and the willingness to invest in people on the margin.
That's right.
People that we used to call poor, now we call them neighbors.
Yes.
And
To
and to
invest
support
in
them.
them. You had a word.
well,
Last
I call
time.
this social equity, or I call the people economically isolated.
That's it.
And sort of overcome their economic isolation.
That's
Yeah.
perfect.
And we don't realize how isolated
Yeah.
people on the margin are. I remember asking the guy who runs the homeless here, who are these people? And he said, they're you and me, they just don't have a support system.
Yes. Isolated.
And that made sense to me.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
And so that would be the performance of generosity. Hospitality is the welcoming the stranger.
Yes.
This has been the Common Good Podcast, conversations at the intersection of place and belonging and remembering. You can learn more about the works of Peter, John, and Walter, as well as the Common Good Fellowship and daily food for thought emails at commongood.cc. Common Good is a collaborative production of The Hive, a center for contemplation, art, and action, and Common Change, eliminating personal economic isolation. We're produced by myself, Troy Bronsink, as well as Joey Taylor. The music for this podcast is written and produced by Jeff Gorman. We look forward to more conversations ahead. And if you're wondering what John, Peter, and Walter are spending all the money on,
They use all their money on booze, women, and movies.